Hi, welcome back to Rising Forward with your coach Terry. This space exists because so many Black women were pushed out of the workforce and we're left to deal with the aftermath on our own. And so I created this podcast because I could not find a space for us to share our stories or be in community with each other as we navigate these crazy times. I want to create honest and forward focused conversations that honor the full humanity of Black women, especially those experiencing a change in their job statuses as they lose careers that they love. In episode one, I talked about naming the grief that we carry. In episode two, I talked about regaining our footing and trusting God. And this episode is about visibility over silence. The reality is that right now, the unemployment rate for Black women is hovering around 7%. And that depends on who you ask. Whatever the number, it isn't abstract. That number is Black women. It's rent or mortgages not getting paid. It's groceries that are unaffordable. It's healthcare, that may be non-existent. It's stress that we don't get to turn off. And this job market is not forgiving. It's not built right now for Black women to get ahead. Many of the positions that we held don't even exist anymore. So if you've been applying, rewriting your resume, waiting for that interview request, and you aren't hearing anything, that is not a personal failure. It's the system that has failed us. And that's why so many of us are feeling tired, ashamed, anxious, or even isolated, especially in the midst of the holiday season. And we understand what's at stake here. With hundreds of thousands of Black women out of the workforce, the economy will continue to suffer. Communities will destabilize. Public and private sector agencies have lost amazing talent. Current and future leaders, managers, decision makers, problem solvers, all of this will keep compounding. And so that's where we are right now. And before I talk about silence and visibility, let me quickly address stability because stability comes first. I've seen people out here talking about empowering Black women to be their best selves. And I get it because that's what I do too as a coach. But before we strategize, before we find our purpose, and before we reinvent ourselves, we need to acknowledge that it's easier said than done when your life is not stable. And we know that there are resources out here for our use. And we've probably exhausted most of them, like unemployment benefits or rental or mortgage assistance or utility help or food programs or healthcare subsidies, and maybe even state and local workforce centers. These supports exist because people fall on hard times. That's what they're there for. These resources are supposed to stabilize us. That's our tax dollars at work. And I am sure, like I said, that most of us have probably already exhausted most of those opportunities, with the exception of the state and local workforce centers, because they are often underutilized and overlooked. But I want to offer other avenues of opportunity that people may not have been suggesting, and that is Black women-centered career networks and coalitions, because they may be able to provide support, referrals, or help with strategizing how to get what you need. There's also peer networks, either in person or virtual, and they may also offer, emotional support, information about grants, temporary work, or information on how to pool resources together as a community, or even how to survive. Getting help is not a moral failure. It's there to help stabilize us, right? And I'm going to share the Black women centered communities and coalitions and the peer networks in the description on this episode, um, just in case they can help someone. And now I want to talk about the cost of silence because as Black women, most of us were taught to keep our business to ourselves, to handle things on our own, to move in silence. But here's the truth, silence is not protecting us when these systems are failing. When we stay silent, it just makes our struggles easier to ignore. It makes other people comfortable with our silent pain. It makes it easy for us not to demand much from the systems that created this mess in the first place. We know that applying to jobs alone is not enough in this moment. We should be reaching out to people. We should be asking business acquaintances about short-term or temporary or contract or freelance work, right? We should be telling our communities and our spheres of influence about what we're looking for and what we need. And that is not about lowering our standards. It's about treading water until better opportunities come. That's part of that stability. Right? In episode 2, I actually have a testimony about that, so I hope you watch it. And so, from a coaching perspective, what does it mean for us to be visible? What would that look like? And when I'm talking about visibility here, I'm talking about pressure. So, what does pressure look like? It looks like Black women collectively and consistently saying out loud, I have been severely impacted by being pushed out of the workforce. It looks like not being apologetic when we talk about our current situation. We did not cause this. This was by design. It looks like being honest about the barriers that we are facing in finding new positions, you know, um, when we're trying to pivot into a whole new career or open up our own businesses. It looks like letting people know that we're unemployed or underemployed, and that's due to politics. And as a bonus, if several hundred thousand of all of us Black women got together and sent a 30-second clip of how this has impacted us to every media outlet and elected official around the country, oh, that would be impactful, right? And I hope somebody's working on that. And I hope they contact me for my little 30-second video. So, and why do I say visibility is pressure? Because it's why contacting our elected officials matters. Look, I do understand that, sometimes people feel like it's pointless or unproductive to contact our elected officials. I know it can also make us feel vulnerable or make us feel at risk. And I know that others think, hey, even if I do it, nothing's going to change. But here's what does happen when we reach out via letters, not emails. Um, Officials have to track that. They have to track who reaches out, right? Our messages, our letters are data, and data is justification for making changes. And justification becomes emergency funding or new programs, or at least pressure. Silence is going to guarantee ignorance. But visibility creates a record. And we don't need to feel like it's a risk to reach out to our own elected officials. They work for us, and we don't have to be eloquent or flowery about it. We don't need to argue. We just need to be blunt and upfront. And we start locally with our cities, counties, state representatives. And we can send letters by ourselves, or we can send it as a collective of Black women or allies. And all we have to say is something like, hey, I'm a Black woman in your district who was pushed out of the workforce this year, and I'm struggling to find stable employment and financial security. I'm asking what resources or support is available at your level, and what are your plans to alleviate the pain and suffering of Black women? That's it, and we're not begging, we're not defending our worth, we're just putting it out there. That is what visibility is. And why does this matter at all? Because I know that sometimes when we're struggling alone, it's just not enough. I also do know that Black women can feel dismissed when we speak up alone. And that's why I suggested, pooling your resources and having more than one Black woman send those letters, because when we speak in numbers, it has an impact. And the biggest impact is that it gets documented. And who's to say we wouldn't get emergency funds for housing support or food or training or grants, And more importantly, we are holding our elected officials accountable. This is not about politics. It's about dignity. It's about worth as contributing citizens and taxpayers and human beings. It's about being counted. So, that's where I am with that. And I'm hoping that you got something good out of this episode. I would ask that you do one thing over the next week or so if you want to. I would say apply for one form of support if you haven't. All of the supports that I talked about, and that includes um, contacting those Black women-centered organizations or the peer networks, reaching out to a person that you know about the work you're looking for, or sending that letter to an elected official and getting your allies and Black women in your district to help with that too. Um, and finally, like I said before, this podcast exists so that Black women don't feel alone. You are not invisible to me. You're not failing. We are all trying to respond to the times that we're in. And we're trying to do it with courage and with hope. In any event, we will always rise forward together. Thank you so much for listening.